So thanks very much to Tina for offering this session, and thanks everyone for tuning in. How it's going to work is I'm going to hand over to Tina in a second, and she's going to say some things, share some things she's been noticing, and share some suggestions, and then we'll have a guided practice with Tina, and then there'll be the opportunity to ask any questions. So that's the basic outline. And you've got a few options in order to ask questions. There should be a raise hand function in your interface. Alternatively, you can wave your hand. If that doesn't work, you can go the old-fashioned way and you can wave your hand. But we'll figure it out as we're going. So over to you, Tina.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, so welcome, folks. And I thought we'd just start off with helping our nervous systems to be as relaxed as possible. I mean, what we're experiencing at this time with the coronavirus pandemic is really unprecedented. And it's easy for our nervous systems to get into a kind of overdrive. So I talked about this on the other recording, but there's a lot of scientific evidence to show that just doing 3 deep belly breaths and exhaling them through the mouth can really calm our nervous systems. So why don't we start by just doing that right now? So all of us, at our own pace, 3 deep belly breaths and exhale through your mouth. And it helps sometimes if you exhale, there can be a kind of relief in the exhaling. Like sometimes we do this naturally without even thinking, that it can feel like the exhale is also a relief. So let's go ahead and do that now. Can also be really helpful just to feel your body, feel yourself where you're sitting, your butt on the chair, cushion, whatever you're sitting on, feeling your arms and legs and the rest of your body. But in particular, the arms and legs tend to be a neutral place in the body that doesn't hold a lot of material. And so that can be something that we can do even while we're active. And I'll be giving out a lot of suggestions. So these are just, find what works for you in terms of really supporting yourself and being present and de-escalating some of the instinctual, fight, flight, freeze responses that can happen in a situation like this. And if this is happening for people, just know that, it's normal, and to not feel like it shouldn't be happening. But to notice when it's happening and to see if you can support yourself to come back to the present moment and de-escalate that cycle. And this can be done as many times a day as we want. So, feeling the body and even looking around the room. Like on Thursday, I was doing sessions I think I had sessions with 9 people on Thursday. And all of them, this was new for a lot of them, were in places that had either just gone on lockdown or going to go on lockdown. People in numerous countries. And, just for most of us right now, not everyone, but for many of us, we're actually in an okay place. We're not in a hospital room, and those people I wouldn't be doing sessions with them probably, but just look around. And if we look around, we can see that it's okay enough. Whatever's happening in our environment for most of us is okay, fairly normal. And it sort of, again, can help ground us in the present moment, that whatever we're seeing in the media or projections into the future that we're having, it's important to be, to be able to have wise action in the situation, but those can take us out of the present moment in such a way that we can't actually have wise action. And so just noticing our surroundings and feeling our body can be a way to be present. And then I think what we'll do now is start with a short, maybe 5-minute samatha meditation. And samatha means both concentration and serenity. So a lot of times when people do this kind of practice, they forget the serenity part of it, that it is actually a serenity meditation, and it can be a wonderful practice for times in our life when it's particularly stressful or chaotic. And so, all different styles of meditation, all are valuable and useful for different things, but because this practice is particularly for serenity, it can be a great one to be doing right now. So in this practice, the way that I'll offer it right now, we're focusing on the breath, and that could be in the belly if that feels more useful to you, or it can be in what's called the Anapana spot or region, which would be between the upper lip and the nostril. And it can be either a spot or it can be the whole region. And what we're doing is we're noticing the breath in that area. So the breath is the object. You may notice it by the sensation as it passes across the skin. That's fine. And when our mind goes to whatever might be arising for you, whatever the thought patterns are, even before all this, but now there can be a lot of fear thoughts and anxiety and other things. So as we are going to those, we just come back to the breath over and over again. And what that does is, for one thing, it gives us a break from the thinking. And it can also serve to just, let us settle into the part of ourself that is here right now. It's a present moment practice. And the part that ultimately this practice can lead to the transcendence of really being in contact with our deeper nature, and then bringing that into the situations we're encountering. So usually this is done with eyes closed. If more eyes open is more comfortable, feel free to do that. And we're just feel yourself sitting there. Really feel that you're grounded, that the earth is supporting you. And then notice the movement of the breath itself as it passes the Anapana spot or region. And one thing that can be helpful with this practice, the pause in between the out breath and the in breath, is often a time when thoughts can arise. And that's a great place to notice the serenity of the practice, that you don't have to be doing anything. This is a break and is relief from a lot of the doing and planning and activities that we may be needing to do during the rest of the day. So I'll be silent and we'll sit for about 5 minutes. That felt good. So I have some things I could say, but I think first to open it up to questions would be a good idea.
Yeah. So any questions really that you have for Tina? Technical questions, meditation questions, personal practice questions. Does anyone have any questions? Yep, Judy, I'll unmute you.
There. Okay, so Tina, lovely to see you again.
Yeah, you too, Judy.
So I find that the fear response is so intense, the anxiety response is so intense, and the thoughts become so jumbled that it's hard to return to the focus on the breath and on the Anapana region. And so I was just wondering how to practice when the system is so dysregulated. So, because, it's for me and many people who have a trauma background, this whole situation is very triggering. So it's not only the current what's happening, it's all the past that gets stirred up. And the mind just really doesn't function very well anymore. The prefrontal cortex is just not doing its job. So I know this is a difficult question, and I appreciate your taking the time. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. And I'm sure you're not alone. That a lot of people, even who don't have a lot of trauma in their history, that for those who do, it really exacerbates it, like you're saying. Yeah. Well, my first suggestion is to stop and actually, as you're doing, realize what's happening. That I'm in fear. I'm anxious, my brain isn't functioning properly, and just doing that alone will bring you into the present moment of that happening, as hard as it is. These things are really hard to be with, and this is part of why we tend to spin out into activities or trying to solve it, or reading the news, or things like streaming Netflix. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with any of these things, but and those may be necessary things to do, and we should keep on top of what's happening. So I'm not saying to not look at the news or to not take a break with entertainment or other things, but at some point, if we're going to metabolize what's happening, and this is, I think what I'd like to say first in response to this is I've been really seeing over this week that my suggestion, and when I had the day where I had just one person after another who were in the early stages, including you, Judy, we have to put on like when we're on a plane and the instructions are being given as what to do in an emergency, we have to put on our own oxygen mask first. So before we can try and help others or take wise action, we have to stabilize ourselves. And there's so much to metabolize right now. And every day there's like new information and things that are hard to take in that we're seeing. So that would be my first suggestion, is to just say, wow, I'm really afraid, and to whatever extent possible to actually feel that. To feel that, and a way to structure feeling it is to feel it in the three centers. And there's actually a fourth spiritual center. If we're going to look at the basic centers, this is different than chakras, but so we have our belly center, and that is really, if we want to stabilize ourselves, the best place to start is the belly center, because that is our grounding. And so to really even right now, you can do this, to feel your belly center, feel your feet on the ground, feel your butt in the chair, look around. That is, brings us into the present place, especially if we're in a place that's, comforting to us. But even like if somebody was in a hospital, or like when my mom was dying, she was in an ICU, my dad and I had to make end-of-life decisions. This is still useful even in those environments, because you're like orienting where you actually are in a present moment. So that would be the first thing, is to start with the belly center. And if we're grounded in the belly center, generally it helps everything else. So that would be the first suggestion. And then to feel what's going on in our hearts. That's usually where the fear can happen in the belly center, in terms of like, tightening and contraction and so on. So this is why the belly breathing helps. But then the next place is really in our heart center. And that's where it can be really hard to feel how anxious or fearful we are. And this is where the Buddhist heart practices, I talked about these on the other one, but especially compassion for ourselves, for the world, for other loved ones who may be having difficulties that we know about, and we're trying to support them, but it has to really start with ourselves. So just to feel compassion for the real suffering that's happening, and for the loss, for the not knowing, for the uncertainty. And that compassion, if we really stay with that, it can be a huge balm. It doesn't necessarily change the situation in itself, but it's a way of self-soothing that can help our nervous systems. This is what babies, when their parent, soothes them, they can regulate. So this is where we're regulating ourselves through that. And I've even heard that things like, and you can do this to yourself, or others can do it for you if you're in have relationships where there's something physical, even something like stroking your head. Like, with babies, how there's like, I have this all the time. I have a tendency to just want to do that if somebody's suffering. If you do that, or if somebody does that for you, it does something to our nervous systems. How did that feel, just doing it now, Judy?
It is surprisingly soothing, I
Isn't
have to
it?
say. It's doing it to myself. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, I will tell you, I had a really awful health condition that was, it's the most painful health condition, chronic, known to humans, about 5 years ago. And I have recovered like 98%, but I was 100% disabled and in severe pain literally all the time. And I was told, this is it for the rest of your life, which will be about 50 years, So, and just regulating the nervous system. And this was one of the things I researched, was if someone else can do it for you, it's wonderful. But even if there isn't anyone, or you're alone, it's a way, it's sort of a gesture of compassion that the body can recognize as well. So, but there's also just orienting our hearts to ourselves, how hard it is. And like, I can feel it right now, that there's a warmth and it's also bringing us into the present moment, that it's true, it is hard. I mean, this is hard for all of us. So it's not only bringing us in the present moment, but it's helping to do the self-soothing that can de-escalate this kind of looping that a lot of people, probably almost everybody, is in to one extent or another. So that's the heart center, and there might be some time there. And then the head center, what mostly happens with people is that we try and figure it out. So then the head center gets just really, 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 really amped up. That's what we use. and so that gets overactivated, and all of what's going on in us ends up being, we're like heads with no bodies, and the body can actually help us a lot in situations like this. So the main thing in the head center, this is where meditation can come in and can break us out of those cycles of just compulsive thinking. Doing more of a Vipassana type, open monitoring practice. It's like, what is actually happening? I'm afraid, my heart is pounding. I notice that I'm having just compulsive fear thoughts. All of that is, it's more of an open monitoring type of meditation like Vipassana that can bring us into the present moment and help us actually see what's going on in our thinking. So generally in a situation like this, what we want to do is de-escalate the thinking, because mostly they're the same thoughts just happening over and over without helping anything. We do need to be thinking now. I'm not implying we don't want to be doing that, because we have to take wise action. But this is where doing something like the samatha meditation that can help us just challenge those patterns and even quell them a little bit, just to like break the cycle, because it can get going so fast that it's just like a self winding up, machine. And so that's really in the head center. If we can find some peace, there's other things for the head center that aren't necessarily spiritual practice, but I'm finding humor is awesome. I actually have a cartoon that, like if you have any email chains you're on where people are sending things, I'm just loving this, and I'll actually show you one. I'll show you and then I'll read it. So let's see. Steve, could you tell me, can that be seen?
Yes, you can. It says, it's for your own good. You have to stop touching your face.
Right. And so it's a dog, and then it's a person with one of those dog collar things on. So I got this the other day, and it was like, wow, I really needed a little comic relief here, And somebody else sent me, and maybe this is going around the internet, but there's somebody did a video of their dog giving us advice. Like the four-leggeds are giving the two-legged some advice, and the dog is talking about how, gosh, they seem to be really agitated up there. What's going on? And, they had actually dubbed the dog talking. So anyway, to me, there are things that aren't necessarily spiritual practice that can help break us out of those unproductive mental cycles. And then when we are in a more de-escalated place, like I'm noticing for myself, I'm wanting to meditate more frequently if I can. I've been really busy just rescheduling events and meeting with people and things. But to come back to that present moment, to whatever accessibility of some deeper aspect of what we are, can really offset. Like if we go a whole day without doing that, that's a long time. It's hard, like sleeping. Sleep is so important. So if we're only doing, if we go a whole day without breaking the cycle and then we think we're going to be able to sleep well, it might be harder. So this is like really having the discipline of de-escalating several times a day is, I think, really helpful. And at some point we'll have more time to do that. A lot of people are running around trying to, get stocked up and figure out what to do about the lockdowns right now. But at some point, people have a lot more time. So that was a long answer, but just, how does that land with you, Judy?
Very, very practical. And I like the suggestion to take time out during the day, because the mind does start to spin really fast.
Yeah.
And it feels like it's sort of a self-reinforcing loop. The faster it spins, the scareder I get.
Right.
So I think that calming as much as possible, taking breaks during the day. That's a very useful suggestion, as is the self-soothing.
Yeah.
I think about petting my dog and how much he likes that. And
Right.
yeah,
We can pet ourselves too.
right. And
Or
then,
ask somebody else to pet us.
right, I get John involved here in a minute. The other thing is that, I've been trying to do this samatha meditation, but I'm sort of more drawn to the vipassana, to just sort of the open awareness right now. It just seems more doable. So I was
Yeah.
glad that you mentioned that does seem.
Absolutely. All the practices, there's really 4 categories in the neuroscience of practices. So I'll just go through those. And then, if you can feel into whatever feels most useful, do that. There's different ones that do different things. The samatha, which is from a neuroscience perspective, focused attention. So we're focusing on one thing and breaking out of compulsive thought patterns. And so that can be useful and there's also a serenity in that. I won't get into all the transcendent aspects of it, but just on a practical level, that can, because there's just one object, we can rest there. The breath is keeping us alive, basically. So there's something soothing just in the breath. That's the focused attention, the samatha, the concentration, meditation. And then there's the open monitoring, which is Vipassana, Shikantaza, and Zen, where we're really noticing what is arising in the present moment. And there's a spaciousness to that, which can feel really helpful. And also, when we're going, okay, I feel afraid, I'm anxious, I'm planning, I'm compulsively worrying. All of that is really doing open monitoring, feeling your body. That's open monitoring. Just noticing the rising and falling in the belly. Those are all aspects of open monitoring types of meditation that can be really helpful. And ultimately the intention of those practices is to, or at least part of it, is to have us get better at just dealing with things as they are, which is really, really useful right now. The samatha is good for helping us break those patterns. The Vipassana type meditations help us be with just how it is right now. I'm afraid for my loved ones. I'm, whatever. So, and then that can settle also. And then the third category is heart-based practices. And that includes like the compassion that we just did. That is a huge practice that I think all of us need to be doing for ourselves and others, but especially for ourselves right now, because this situation warrants compassion, and it's going to warrant compassion for a long time. There's also the equanimity practice, which is one of the four Brahma Viharas, just to say what they are. Loving kindness, which is kind of our baseline, well-wishing of others. So, that's actually been a nice thing that I found in my neighborhood where I walk. There's all these people who I never would normally see on my walks. And, even though we're like waving from 6 feet away, it's really nice to see them. There's kids playing out there, and, the dog people are all finding each other from 6 feet away. And, it's, so it's like this well-wishing, and we're all in the same boat. So this is a place where that can, like, I've been even more in touch with that because of the situation. So loving kindness, joy, which, like, I'll tell you, it's been beautiful here. And when I go on my walks, or when I have my meals at home and I have food and I'm, feel grateful, I'm letting myself feel the joy of that, And it's usually empathetic joy, that's how it's framed in the practice, joy for others' good fortune. But we can also really take time. It's gratitude practice when it's for ourselves. So to feel the gratitude for, we're all here on the internet. There are people, I read a story in the paper about a woman who was foregoing her own meals so her daughter could eat. And a week ago she had a job. So, it's heartbreaking, but at the same time, to feel grateful for what we have, for the beautiful day yesterday, for the birds, for seeing a deer walk by, for seeing the people talking to each other. I let myself feel grateful, and we need that. We need to take the places where it's good and let them in. And then the next practice is the compassion, which I talked about. The last one, and the compassion practice, can go out to others. And then there's equanimity, which that's thought to be the hardest of the four. And how to have equanimity in a situation like this. And to, from my last talk, I put the chart that had the Brahma Viharas and how to do the practice. I mean, it's very basic. There are a lot of talks, but that's still available through my other interview with Steve and also on my website. I updated the equanimity phrases, like one way, and really what we're looking for with this is, how can I be at peace even though none of this makes sense, even though it's awful and horrific. And it's a kind of surrender, actually. So one of the phrases was, may I experience peace despite my inability to understand this. Or may I trust in a larger perspective beyond my personal view. Or even if another loved one or ourselves are suffering, I wish for your well-being, but I can't keep you from suffering. Or so these are ways of orienting to the equanimity practice. And before I go on to the last category, I'll just say that something that happened to me yesterday that for me brought a lot of peace. Now, I'm not in a high risk category, because I'm 56, I'm under 60, and I'm really healthy. So this wouldn't apply to people probably who are in high risk categories. But something shifted for me yesterday when I realized that I'm okay if I get the virus. I actually am going to stop. I'm going to keep doing all the measures. I'm not going to try to get it or anything. But if I get it, I was just looking at the numbers, and this is what has not been put forward in all of the way that the media is talking about it. So out of 100% of people, they're thinking worst case, 60 to 70% will get the virus over the next X amount of time. That's a high percentage. That's more than half. So if I'll just assume I'm in the 60%. I mean, if I could volunteer to be in the 60% and save somebody else, I would, but that's not how viruses work. And then within the 60%, between 2 and 4%, it will be fatal, which is just horrific in terms of the number of people. But that means 96 to 98% of the people at every age, well, it gets worse as the ages go up. But even with my dad, who's 85, who I was so worried about, and I'm still worried, even in his age group, there's an 80% survival rate. So the vast majority of us are going to live through this. We're going to get it, and we're going to live. And there was something that just sort of, and this may not be true for others, but for me, there was something that just let go. It was like, you know what, I can just be at peace that that's probably how it's going to be. And, it's helpful to also be prepared for death, to really be thinking about what preparations need to be made in case one is in the percent. But the vast majority of us are going to survive through this. We're going to get it, and we're going to survive at every age. So for me, that let me feel an equanimity yesterday that I hadn't felt. It was like something in me came, because the way that the media is focusing on the smaller percent, which I see why, because we need to help those people be okay and reduce the numbers if we can. But for most of us, we will get it and we'll survive. And there's something for me that allows for equanimity in that. And then there's also the Tonglen practice, which I talked about in the prior interview, where we're actually trying to reduce the suffering of others remotely. And so I won't talk about that since I did that in the other interview. But if we feel we're in a place, you know, this is where we have to put on our own oxygen mask first. We shouldn't be doing Tonglen if our own oxygen mask isn't on. But if, you know, for those people who feel like you're in a good place and you're stable, to be able to do something in Tibetan Buddhism, it's really thought this actually helps reduce other suffering. So it's something like, as I have more time, I'm going to start doing Tonglen more for longer periods every day, where you take in the suffering into your heart. And like one person I know talks about, we have to really be in a place of emptiness of self to do this effectively, and that's a pretty hard place to get. But if that's happening, it's like the suffering's coming in, and it's almost like a bug zapper, where it just, which I mean, it's a weird way to think of it, but I sort of liked it because, you know, it's just so instantaneous, it just like dissolves it. Maybe there's some nicer metaphor, but I kind of like the image of that. And then we breathe out compassion and peace. So we're almost become a processing mechanism for the collective suffering. So those are the heart practices. And then the last category is self-transcendent practices. And these are really practices designed to put us in direct contact with our deeper nature, whether that takes a form of emptiness or unity, or, you know, however one's perspective orients to that. And those practices are especially useful like at death, or at, or there's a way that really difficult situations like this can give people, spiritual practitioners, but even not spiritual practitioners, like it can let the ego let go in a way that we can really be in touch with our deeper nature in a more direct way, because either through spiritual practice, through our own evolution, or through circumstances, like in Tibetan Buddhism, as one approaches death, there's more and more opportunity, because we've kind of, if we get that we're dying and we have a little time, we let go. We're not holding on to who we were or our life or trying to survive. It's like the survival instinct just lets go. And we can actually be living from our deeper nature in a way. Like, I haven't experienced this myself, but people who work in hospice and see a lot of people in the dying process, I've heard this so many times, that people are so radiant. Some people at death are so radiant. They're just like, it's like you can just see the grounded being coming out of them, even though their body is wasting away. So that is, you know, situations like this give all of us, like right now, the whole world is thinking about and contemplating their death. Pretty much. That's why we're all so triggered, you know, but that's never happened before, where everyone on the planet has known that there could be something that could cause our death. I mean, none of us knows if we're going to be one of the ones that are affected this way. So the self-transcendent practices were really turning our awareness to awareness itself in different ways, to that underlying awareness that's knowing the fear, or knowing the joy, or knowing the planning, or that's taking action. That awareness, that awake awareness is always there, and to be able to know that directly. So those are the four categories, and all of those are good in the situation, depending on what's happening. So really to be drawn to whatever feels most useful at any time. And it's a great time to practice. And I'll just say, I wanted to make sure I remembered this, that Stephen and I have, we have what we call retreats in a box on our website. And normally there's a fee for those depending on how long it is and how much material. Like some of them have videos, some of them are short and just audio, some of them have printed materials, some have videos, some are long, some are short, but there's a fee for all of them, and we're going to make those all free for at least through June or for however long this goes on. So I haven't had time to go on the website and make them free yet. You know, I have to actually make some changes to the site that they're loaded onto, but I'll do that next week. And if people want to do sessions, they still will need to pay for that part of it. But just to download the material and have retreats in a box of different lengths that you can do. Right now, what's on there is the 2-week Samatha retreat, which is our longest retreat. We're thinking we might add a few talks to that to turn it into the Luminous Mind retreat, where we also teach the Dzogchen. And then people at a certain point can choose whether they want to do Dzogchen or Samatha. So maybe in the next couple of weeks, as we have more time, we'll add those to it. And then there's also a retreat called Understanding Awakening. That's like a 2 to 5 day. I mean, you can just listen to the talks without doing a retreat too. And let's see, I'm going to be adding a shorter Samatha retreat that can be done as like a 2 to 5 day. It's audios only, and then I'll probably be adding a video day long in a box over the next couple of weeks. I just haven't had time to do it. So
That's great.
Yeah,
that's very generous of you, and I should mention that's the other Stephen, not this one. Stephen Snyder, Tina's teaching partner.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, Stephen Snyder, my ex-husband and teaching partner, that, you know, he and I have been teaching together and wrote our book together and are still, you know, good friends and teach together. So thanks for clarifying that, Steve.
That's all right. That's wonderful. So I think we have time for one more. We've got about 10 minutes left. I'm wondering if Roberta or John have a short question. Oh, yeah. Okay, I'll unmute Roberta. You look like...
I'm not feeling any anxiety or fear. I turned 70 last year, so I'm in the kind of older category. My partner is quite vulnerable. I find myself quite, I think when I reached 70, I felt like I had my 70 years and 10, and anything more was a bonus. So I'm kind of in a place where I'm kind of quite philosophical about, you know, if something bad does happen to me. It's so that the anxiety, I don't have any anxiety, and I don't think, I mean, obviously I'm very concerned and I feel compassionate towards people. But what is impacting me most is a sense of real grief that I'm not able to see my granddaughter. And I was supposed to be spending this weekend with my 2 daughters who are both grown up, and one weekend a year we go away together and just have a lovely time together and reconnect. So obviously I'm doing that over Skype and so on, but it's really hard. It's really hard because she's 4 and she's growing up very quickly, and I feel the connection isn't there in the same way. So I don't know, but on the positive side, I'm finding a lot of sense of samvega, sense of urgency to practice, and I have been practicing a lot more, doing a lot of chanting, the Metta Sutta and Brahma Vihara as well, and I'm finding that's very helpful, and going for long walks and doing things in the garden, you know. So it's just that bit about missing out on my granddaughter.
Right. Yeah.
It is very painful. I'm finding it very painful not to be able to be in contact with her.
Yeah. Yeah, you really bring up a great point, Roberta, and it really shows a lot of equanimity that you have, that you know, the other aspects of what some people are experiencing, you're not, but this grief. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because this is a place where I'm imagining that more and more people will really start being in touch with the grief of what's going to be lost over the next however amount of time. And you're feeling that right now with just not being able to be in contact. And even when you are in contact via Skype or Zoom, it's not the same as being in person, and it's not.
Especially with a child.
Yeah, because they, aren't always, screen time at that age especially, it isn't as real to them. Well, it's not as real to any of us, but we can kind of adapt as adults.
Make the jump.
Yeah, and just the not being able to have those relationships, and that's going to probably get more acute for all of us over time as this goes on. So this is, I think, really taking some time. What I would say would be similar. I mean, sounds like you're pretty grounded in your belly and here, and you're not sort of having the spinning from anxiety, but the heart and the grief and the loss of the weekend you had planned. And I think the other day I was talking to a friend about the millions of people the actors who aren't in their Broadway plays, and the athletes who have trained all their lives for events that aren't happening, and the people who are going to get married at this time. Or I have two friends who've lost a parent and they can't have funerals. And, just the number, I think probably all of us feel, if we're, you may be ahead of the curve on the grief, because I think most people are more in anxiety about how do I get my situation adjusted to this new reality of lockdowns. But to really feel that grief, in your heart. And it is a loss, and it is a loss, and to let yourself really grieve for it. I don't know
what that's all I know how to, that's all I know to do with it, really. And
this is where, again, the Vipassana, the open monitoring of really being like, this is a loss for me. I mean, maybe I'm not in a hospital bed somewhere, but at the same time, this is real. This is a real loss, and to let yourself really feel the sadness of that. And then to come back with the compassion practice for yourself, for them, for your granddaughter who won't have that time with you. And, this is really what being present does.
Well, it's real, isn't it?
It's real. Yeah, I think that's what I really want to say, is that it's easy to look at the life or death situations and think that that's the only thing that's real. And because I'm not having that, and I'm having a loss of connection to my family, my granddaughter, that's I shouldn't feel that, or I mean, you didn't say that, but I'm saying this more in case other people see this. So it is real, and it's okay for you to feel the loss and to grieve it, and to feel compassion for yourself for the loss of that, if this goes on for some amount of time, however long it is. 4-year-olds, they change a lot in 6 months, so it's a loss that you can't recover, even if you can see her again at some time and have the joy of that. So this is what we're working with. And there are sort of practices for grieving that, maybe you can do, when somebody passes away, when my mom died, I had her picture and a candle, and there was I had a little altar to her for a long time. And also when my friend Brian died suddenly, it was unexpected, same thing. Maybe there's some way you can do something that's showing your devotion to that relationship that can help you feel like a special kind of reverence for
I do
that.
have I do have a candle on my shrine and for her, but I've also taken up knitting, and there's something about knitting and knowing every stitch of this thing I'm knitting for her is,
Oh.
you know, it's about holding her in mind.
Right.
Yeah, which I find quite helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can be doing something that feels connected to her, even while you can't be physically connected. And I love that that's physical too, because you can touch and feel that, and hopefully one day give her that, knowing how much joy you had making it and how much you'll enjoy seeing her have it. Yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for calling in. We're out of time now. Tina's site, where she has her retreats in a box that Stephen and Tina are making available for free, is Awakening Dharma. And the interviews that Tina and I have done are on guruviking.com. And the most recent one is about this whole pandemic situation. And Tina's guiding Tonglen practices. She guides Brahmi Vihara practices and gives an awful lot of detail there. So yeah, once again, everyone, thank you, Judy, John, Roberta, Tina. Thank you very much for being so generous with your time.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Steve. And thank you, Tina. I lost you there for just a minute, but I wanted to say a deep thank you for this interview and for making your materials available to everyone. That's really generous.
Yeah.
And, thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
My pleasure. And it'll be next week when they are set up. So feel free to take advantage of that.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone.